Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Mob Psycho 100, Season 2, Episode 2. Another great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So the main crux of this episode revolves around rumors, and I like the whole notion of it, and it kind of went into it, but not really in like how it really works. The whole notion of, right, there's certain like rumors, and because of the spirituality of the world and stuff, the more widespread a rumor is amongst the masses, the more power you give to it, which I think is such an interesting thing. And obviously different stories have kind of pulled from that nature of like the more you believe in something, the more powerful it gets. That ends up being like, I mean, a more recent example would be like Demon Lord 2099. I'm currently watching the anime, which is currently airing. The whole premise behind that is Vettel trying to get his worshippers up, because the more people believe in him, the more they follow him, the more powerful he gets. And so it's just kind of a similar premise, and you know, same thing as like the gods and stuff like that. The more you believe in them, the stronger they are. The iconography and stuff like that, like you give it more power, shape, and form. But obviously this involves Regan and Mob meeting another spiritual guy. His name is Shinra, and him and Regan bump heads because like Regan's like came to this place because of all the rumors and stuff like that, and the urban legends. I said rumors, but it goes hand in hand, but like the rumors and urban legends. And here he is stepping in someone else's like spot, which is like, yo, you're an outsider. The only way you can work here and do your thing as like a spiritual specialist or whatever is if you're a part of this organization. Which we only met Shinra, so I'm wondering will we interact with, like, is it, because the way he was talking about it, it seems like he's part of a larger organization. So I don't know if we just didn't meet the other people, or is he the only psychic? But it's like, because this is my lane of business, you'd have to basically join me, and like basically I get a slice of that pie of like whatever money you make. But anyway, they meet a client who's dealing with a ghost, and I love that Regan's like, right, there's nothing there, because Regan doesn't see anything, even despite his powers, because he might have been able to see Dimple, but as we see later on, Dimple can still hide himself from Regan, because Regan's got like the smallest percentage of like spiritual awareness now after having a lot of Mob's powers in the season 1 finale. But yeah, he doesn't recognize the ghost that's there. But then Mob was like, yo, there's like a middle-aged like guy beside her or whatever. And then Regan was like, cool, let's take this on, let's do this job. And so it's about all these rumors getting stronger and stronger, and she feels like it's led to like some negative energy following her around. So they proceed to investigate. You know what else this episode kind of reminded me of? Because obviously not all of it ended up being true. Some of it did, but not all of it. But there's an element of, because some of it was true. It reminds me of, if you've ever played Kingdom Hearts 2, in the prologue section in Twilight Town, the 7 wonders, it kind of gave me that same energy. Which I'm sure like now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm sure that's really pulled from a lot of like urban legends. I'm sure a lot of this is based on real like urban legends in Japan and stuff like that. So it's probably not made specifically for the show. It's them taking real urban legends and rumors that exist in Japan and just making them applicable in this case. Like, for example, like the red jacket person in a raincoat. Like, the thing that immediately comes to my mind is, oh my god, what's that game made by Swery? Oh my god, it's basically Twin Peaks. I can't remember its name off the top of my head. The serial killer is wearing a red raincoat, essentially. I had to look it up. It's Deadly Premonition. I'm also going to tell you how I Googled it. I couldn't remember the game's title, but I definitely remember Francis York Morgan's name. So yeah, but either way. But yeah, like Deadly Premonition has a raincoat killer in red, so that's why I'm like, that has to be like a general thing they pull from. There's another thing in this episode, and I'll go ahead and jump to it, is the Dash Granny, which comes at a wild time to watch this episode in particular because of Dun, who has its own Dash Granny, or rather Turbo Granny. And I was like, the moment that happened, and it even showed the exact same pathway and tunnel that they go to in Dandadan, I was like, oh, that must be, once again, just a real urban legend in Japan, and that must be that very specific spot. It's so interesting too because I was watching someone watch the first episode of Dan to Dan, and they had pointed out, like, because they had watched Mob Psycho, they're like, oh, it kind of reminds me of the tunnel that Mob and Regan went to in the first episode. I was like, oh, that's funny, which is ironic considering they come to like that exact tunnel from Dan to Dan in this. It's just interesting how that all works out. So that's why I'm like, it has to all be pulled from some version of reality to some extent. So I just thought that was interesting. But we'll get to Dash Granny later. Either way, like I said, the other thing is some of these rumors end up not being true. The dog with a human face, it's just a whole bunch of kids like drew on a dog's face, but the owner is so old, his eyesight's poor, so he doesn't even recognize they did what they did. And then Regan proceeded to beat the kids up a little bit, and they're like, oh, we're going to tell like the PTA. He's like, oh, go ahead. There has to be some kind of adult that puts you guys in line, and he's trying to act all tough, but he gives an alias, and even Mob's like, even you're up here using a fake name. I was like, I love that. It's like, right, you're trying to, once again, he's scumbaggy enough and like slimy and foxy enough to know, like, you know, just a way around some situation. He knows how to skate around a situation and manipulate a situation to his benefit. That's all Regan. But either way, basically he forces Shinra to work with them. And it's just like, right, I'll cut you in on the pay. And what's going to happen is we're going to look into some of this stuff. You investigate on your own. And they told Dimple to go follow him. Which I even love. Dimple's like, yo, I actually try to make myself invisible just so Regan will stop trying to talk to me. But he's like, yeah, you kind of work for us and stuff like that. And Dimple's like, when the hell did that happen? So I was like, fine, whatever. So he follows Shinra, which poor Shinra, he's trying to get some information out of some kids, and they're kind of freaked out. And they were like, yeah, this creepy guy. So we tried to, but like Shinra's like, where? And he's grabbing onto the kids trying to get some information. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, I got too excited. He's like, I mean, not in that way. I didn't get excited in that way. And they're just like, ew, you creep. They set off an alarm when he gets too close, and everyone in the playground's like, oh, you creep. Kids are throwing rocks at him. But then the Flasher shows up, because that's who the guy in the red jacket is, and it turns into like a Street Fighter-esque like 2D fighter, which I was like, oh, that's so cool. I love when stuff does this. I was like, that's so fun. And Shinra would have won the fight, but he got off the guy. The guy was like, oh, I'm sorry. And then he immediately ran away. So Shinra follows him, but the guy's like, he's a real disgusting bastard. I mean, we kept seeing cheeks this episode. But yeah, like he lured Shinra out there to be away from people so that he can use a stun rod against them. And it's like, oh yeah, and like, for him, he gets off on how much the legend is spread about him, and he feels so good about it, but he's got to get rid of any witnesses that have seen his face because it causes problems. But the problem is, you're in the wrong area, and the dragger ends up being real, and she pops up, and we actually never... Oh, no, I was about to say, like, we never actually saw what happened to him. It was like, no, he got arrested in the episode, because she was about to drag him into the water. I was like, oh, you're about to be super dead. But luckily, Shinra came to and fought him off, which... Even he was about to get dragged under until Dimple possessed his body. And we get to see Dimple kind of like cut loose a little bit more. I wonder if it's because like because he did some stuff obviously when they were going up against Claw, but I feel like he did more in Shinra's body. But to be fair, Shinra does actually have spiritual energy and stuff. So he was doing his thing, but the dragger ended up being too tough for him. Hell, he almost got stabbed, but the only reason why he survived is because Shinra had like like some kind of spiritual book like right where the stab wound was, so it protected him. But obviously it's too much for Dimple to handle. He was going to try and run away because he's like, I could just run away on my own, but I promised, you know, Mob that I'd look after this guy. And for him, it's like, I don't know if he's still aiming for the whole situation of, well, because he still wants Mob to trust him, and he's like, if I run away, Mob is not going to trust me at all. So I'm curious if it's going to be a situation of he's still aiming to possess Mob's body, or does he think that's so far out there that he's not even going to try anymore? Because, once again, it hasn't been that long since Season 1's finale, and he did get back some of his powers when he was stuck inside that thing that the guy who controls spirits from Claw did. Like, he devoured some of them and got stronger, but obviously nowhere near to where he was before. Definitely not in any position to possess and take over Mob's body. So I don't know if he's even on that path anymore and just kind of, or just doing his thing. I don't know. He hasn't really revealed whether or not he's still on his evil plans of possessing Mob or not. So I just thought that was interesting. So that could explain why he's like, oh, I want to be on Mob's side. But it could also be like if I step out of line, I want to be a good terms with Mob in case he decides to one day, like, fully exercise me. But I think it's probably more so I'm still on my I want to possess your body's lane of things. But either way, luckily, Mob and Regan show up and we're able to fight off the dragger. But the fact is, they couldn't really beat her. And it turns out Shinra was like, none of my attacks worked because she's grown more and more powerful. And I think it was Dimple that kind of explained this. And then Shinra kind of added to it. But because the legends about her have spread so deeply, it's basically like some deep-seated childhood stuff of because you believe the rumors about like her exploits and how crazy powerful she is, you could never beat her. It becomes that thing of like basically the legends and rumors because you believe them so deeply because they've been around ever since he was a kid. And it's like, he's like, even, I walk by an alley, it'd be raining, and I love that he's got like a red umbrella and a yellow jacket, raincoat on. I'm like, that's, once again, maybe there's a Japanese context to that. My immediate thought is Georgie from It was what immediately crossed my mind, but I don't know if that's the energy that was giving or whether that is, like I said, a little more like there is Japanese cultural context for that, maybe. I don't know. Either way, Mob ultimately is able to beat her because he doesn't believe, and as Dimple puts it, it's like, he doesn't believe in urban legends. He's so out of the loop that because he doesn't really believe in the urban legends, because I was wondering if the justification would be like, well, Mob buries his feelings, so he's not not attacking out of fear. But it's like, because he doesn't believe in all this, he doesn't follow any of this, he doesn't know about her exploits, and so he has no reason to fear it. Which, like I said, on top of that, it probably also does help that he, like, buries his emotions, but yeah. So he's able to easily win, and then Regan's kind of like chastising him a little bit, like, don't you realize how scary she is that she could do this? He was like, oh, interesting. And then Regan was like, oh, so you're basically writing fanfic in your head about this whole thing, because that's how you wrote it in your head, and there was no fear driven by like, oh, you're not scared of her, because in your head it was just kind of like, oh, this is a story being written about her, you don't look at it as real. That's how I'm probably not explaining it the best, but I thought that was so interesting in that regard. But either way, when it's all said and done, the next place they move on to is the Dash Granny of it all. And she's just some old lady. Like, the moment she took off running, like she was running, I was kind of expecting, like, is she going to look a little bit like Turbo Granny? But not really. But Mob tries to stop her, but his powers don't work. I was like, well, she doesn't look like a spirit. She looks like she's just a regular old lady. I was like, is that why Mob's power isn't working? But it's like, I was about to say, he's used his powers against people before. He can use them against people, but I guess, like, whatever he was doing, it was the typical thing I use against spirits. I wasn't approaching her like she was a regular human. But she runs past him, and the whole rumor is, and like I said, I think this plays into like the Japanese cultural element of it all. It's like, if she catches up to you, she'll jump on top of you and strangle you. Because in Dan to Dan, the whole thing is, if she passes you in a race, she will curse you. And I guess that's supposed to be kind of cut from the same cloth in a lot of ways. But they're running, and obviously our boy Mob falls behind despite pushing himself, and he gets past, but so does Regan and Dimple. So she just runs. It's like, oh, she's just a regular old grandma. And poor Mob is beating himself up because he's like, I've actually been a part of the body improvement club, and an old lady beat me in a race. It's like, you in the past would have done a lot worse. I mean, we've never seen him run for extended periods of times, because every time we've ever caught Mob, like, during the whole, like, training process when it comes to the body improvement club, it's usually after he's been running for at least a tiny bit. We see him collapse, but we never see how long he can. I feel like prior to the body improvement club, Mob wouldn't even been able to go as long as he did. So I think there is improvement. There's something to feel accomplished about, but poor Mob is kind of like beating himself up about like losing in that regard. And I love that the voiceover's like, basically that was Mob's first traumatic experience with an urban legend. He won't like let that he won't never be able to live that down. And I'm curious to see if that's something we do see carry over throughout the entire season, of more urban legend stuff causes more issues, or is this going to be a one-off thing that maybe they call back to in the final season, or maybe it does come back up this season about other like urban legend traumatic stuff or not. So I believe the Turbo Granny, I keep saying Turbo Granny, sorry. Hopefully when it comes to Don, which drops tomorrow at the time you're recording this, hopefully I won't mess up and call her Dash Granny. But Dash Granny, I can't remember that. I think that happened after they dealt with the Dragger and the Flasher got arrested. And so it's like, oh, they're on good terms with Shinra, so... And we do see that he's in the outro, so I could definitely, just like Emmy, he's like a new character we're getting that I'm sure we're probably going to see sprinkled in throughout the season, so... And ultimately, we also have Regan making a website because he got inspired because the client from this episode, she's like, oh yeah, she got all this terrible advice online. He's like, oh, why didn't I ever think about, making a website? And even Dimple calls him out like, yo, this looks shady as hell. And that's the end of the episode, so. Also, since I brought up the outro since a little earlier, a minute or so ago, I really like the art style of the outro. It looks like basically it looks like painted, kind of. That's probably not the right word, but I just like this aesthetic of just kind of, they look like painted chibi versions of all the characters. And I liked how that looked artistically. I was like, oh, that's super cute. But yeah, just another fun, interesting episode of Mob Psycho 100. I'm excited to ultimately see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.